2-minute warning that we're going to get started soon. So just a heads up, because I did not say this before, and I don't want to catch anyone off guard. So technically, we're not supposed to have any food or drink in this room. So we won't eject you from the room or anything like that. But we built in some time afterwards so that you can enjoy the reception and the delicious treats and whatnot, as you can connect with the speakers if you want to talk to them more one-on-one. So just kind of know that we are going to be recording this on Facebook Live tonight, so you can mention it to your friends, or if you want to go back and watch it afterwards. And then the way the flow of the evening will be, so Tarsha and Derek are each going to speak for a period of time to kind of tell their story. And then there will be a Q&A afterwards, where it'll be a facilitated Q&A, but I'll also be circulating with a mic. So definitely be percolating on your questions, and just stick your hand up if you have a question, and I'll come to you, and we'll make sure that you get it in. About 2 minutes.
No makeup. Crazy. Crazy. Victoria, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear us okay? CASA volunteers. So the speakers kind of know the audience they're working with. How many would you say work in the system? Social workers, teachers, legal professionals, etc. Okay. How many of you are invested, community members, maybe friends of Derek or Tarsha, kind of know them, fans of theirs? Okay. So we're really excited that all of you are here this evening. So I'm guessing if you're here, you probably have some sort of interest in foster care or social issues. But for those of you who may not be aware, CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates, and we serve children who have been abused and neglected within the court system. So kind of our role is to be an extra set of eyes and ears to advocate for a child's best interests. So Tarsha and Derek are both going to tell us a little bit tonight about their time in the foster care system. To my knowledge, neither one of them had a CASA volunteer, so I'm really curious to hear from them about ways they feel like CASA advocacy can kind of make a difference. Because part of what we do is to advocate for a child's needs or what a family may need in order to be reunified with their family, in order for the child to come out of foster care. So we have multiple children, 60-some children on our waiting list. So if you are interested in supporting the children in our community in that way, then we are definitely happy to talk with you more about that later. Also, one thing that I did want to mention, because there are a lot of systems professionals in the room tonight, we recently bought a film called Resilience, which is about childhood trauma and the long-term impact that can have on people. If you are interested in seeing that film or having your organization see that film or have your organization screen it, please contact me afterwards, because we are happy to travel and bring that film to you and share it widely with the community. So we'll look forward to connecting more afterwards. And so with no further ado.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Derek Polley. She stated I'm a Lynchburg City School Board member, but I'm here today. She told me about this event and some of the great things that CASA does as far as with the, what CASA does with some of the foster care and the adoptive communities here. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of my story. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but just wanted to shed a little bit of light and give a little bit of transparency in my experience with foster care, even though it was in a different state. I'm originally from Houston, Texas. I came here by way of Liberty University back in 2002. But yeah, I've been here for about 15 years, so I definitely call Lynchburg my home. The makeup of my family, and I do have some questions in front of me because this is kind of an emotional topic, so I want to make sure I stay on topic and kind of address some of the things that she wanted me to touch on. The makeup of my family, I would say, is definitely extended. Besides my mother and my father, of course, my parents unfortunately had suffered some serious drug addictions, heroin, cocaine, crack. Those are things that they took part in, unfortunately. And so during that time, they made some very, very poor decisions, especially when it comes to me and my siblings. I do have 4 brothers and sisters. I'm the youngest. And so this was during the 80s, I guess, you could say, back when some drugs were just hitting the scene. But there were some situations where my parents were definitely just involved with just negligent activities like joyriding. And during that time, unfortunately, they would have some of the drugs that they were doing with them. So there was one particular day, it was my mom and my aunt. They were joyriding in a car that was stolen. They happened to get pulled over by the police during that search of the vehicle. They found that they had some heroin in the vehicle. My aunt was sent to prison, and my mother, of course, myself and my brother were in the backseat of the vehicle. So that's how my brother and I ended up being taken away from my mother at that time. And it said, how long was I there? I was in the foster care system for about 2 years. The ironic, or I guess one of the crazy things when I think about it is I was in foster care taken away from my parents, but I was only just a few blocks away from my mother's home. It wasn't like I was in Houston, Texas, but it wasn't like they moved me to the north side or to the east side. I was still on the same side of town, just a few blocks away from where my mother lived. So the family that I was living with, I think that was one of the most confusing things, is that I remember I was about 5 or 6 years old. I remember being in the same neighborhood around the same streets, but I just wasn't going home to see my family. Wasn't going home to see the people that I know. So that was just a confusing time that I kind of remember about that specifically when I was taken away from my mother. The reason why I guess the most negative impact that had was me being separated from my next oldest brother. He and I had a very close relationship, so we had always bounced around and been in different environments, but he was one person that I could always count on. He's about 2 years older than me. So when we were taken away, we were split up. And of course, being separated from my mother and father, all those things are hard. But with them having the lifestyles that they had, sometimes them being absent wasn't necessarily a bad thing. But when it comes to missing my brother, I remember specifically that being a tough time just because of the relationship and the bond that we had. Because of everything that we went through, we went through it together. So during that time, we were separated from each other. The next question was, how did I get out of the foster care system? I was actually, because of the close vicinity that we were to my mother and other people that we knew, someone in my family actually saw me while I was playing. It was my aunt. She lived a couple blocks away from my mother, and still a couple of blocks away from the foster care family where I was. So at that point, no one had any contact with me. When I talked to my aunt about it, no one knew where I was, me or my brother. So it was, looking back at it, knowing that we were just literally just a couple blocks away, and that someone actually saw us and told my aunt, hey, I saw your nephew, and I know that you've been looking for him. Put her in contact with the agency, and she followed up and made sure that we got out of that situation. She found myself and my brother. We were in two different places. Unfortunately, my brother was in a way worse situation than I was. Neither one was an ideal situation, but my brother was suffering from a different type of abuse where he was, and that's what my aunt luckily was in the right place at the right time and was able to have the knowledge and the connections of people to get custody of me and my brother and get us taken out of that situation. My relationship with my family during that time was non-existent. There was no contact with any of my family while I was living in foster care. I guess that was intentional. I can't speak on their behalf, but I didn't have any relationship with my family or any type of connection with my family while I was in foster care. So looking back, that's something that I would, I think that was one of the questions that I saw. What advice would you give as far as to making connections? As far as to foster care families, I would say that keeping the connection with any existing family, because you never know what type of bond, that child might have. I know that sounds very obvious, but more people that I've spoken with that were involved with the foster care who had siblings that were split up, doesn't seem like there was any intentional effort to keep that bond alive. And I know I was just 5 and 6 years old, but I missed my brother a lot, and that really had a pretty negative effect on me during that time. How did my life unfold after I left care? And I'm very, when I speak about different things, I try to always give a positive, some silver lining. So far, I've been reading some pretty gloomy things, so I want to make sure that there is some positive to the end of this story. So during the time after I got out of foster care, I moved to East Texas, Center Texas, with my grandmother, and that was a big difference from the big city of Houston. You moved to living with my parents, no structure, the lifestyle that they had. Then moving to East Texas with my grandmother, very down to earth, very much a lady of faith. Had us in church, had me going to school. Because that's one thing I was sharing with my wife as I was researching some of these questions. As I was moving around and doing different things during my childhood, especially the elementary years, my grades never suffered. My grades were always up to par, and I don't think that's anything special about me per se. I think that does say to some of the people that were involved in my life, like for instance my grandmother, who was a teacher. She was a teacher, she was a nurse. She had a salon that she built onto the side of her home, so she was an entrepreneur by nature. But she taught me a lot of the core values that I'm using today in my everyday life. When it comes to knowing how to work hard, living with my grandmother, she wasn't expecting to have to take on 2 young children at that time, her being a senior citizen at the time. So there were some very tough financial times that we had to face. But, waking up every morning we had to do a chore before we ate. That was a rule in her house. Before you're not just going to get up and eat, you're going to get up and you're going to show some gratitude for what God has provided you with. And we did hard chores. It was in a rural town, so farm life. Wake up in the morning. We had chickens and we had all types of animals. Taking the chicken from the backyard and learning how to, cut the head off the chicken, dip it in the hot water, pluck the feathers, take it from the backyard to the kitchen in about 50 minutes if we had to. So I know all about hulling peas and shucking peas growing up in that country life. And those things I did not like growing up, but she was trying to instill just that hard work and understand what it means to get up and take pride in what you're doing. And one lesson I always remember was the day before school started. And as I said, she just wasn't expecting to take on two young children that young. But she definitely, it was the day before school started, and I remember being being upset because I didn't have some of the stylish clothes that the other kids were wearing. And we lived right next door to a park. It was Perry Sampson Park, and every Sunday the kids would come out, and there'd be a lot of people out in the park. And so she told me that, you can either sit here and complain about not having the things that you want, or we can get up in the morning and we can go and we can, pick up some of the cans. That was the way that we would make money back then. We would pick up some of the aluminum cans. And I was like, man, I do not want to pick up no cans to get some clothes or whatever it is that I wanted. But she said, well, if you said you wanted, so we're waking up, it was like 4:45, 5:45 that next morning, the day before school. We woke up, we picked about 17 bags worth of cans, all types of cans, and we went and we recycled them. And I remember when they gave us the money, it wasn't that much money. It was probably about maybe $20, $25 or so. But it was a lesson learned. I could have laid in my bed that morning and complained the whole morning about what I didn't have, or I could just get up and realize that I do have some control over what I can do. You can't worry about what I don't have and what I can't do, but what can I do? And so even though all the situations went on with my parents, I think that time I spent with my grandmother really laid a solid foundation for different things later on in life. I've been blessed to be an entrepreneur and do other things, and when I come across hard times, I always rely on some of that foundation that my grandmother gave me. And well, that was the next question. How do I think that my past experience affected my life today? When it comes to community work and doing things in the community, I've realized that some of the things that I went through, I need to reach out to people who might be going through some of those same struggles. I might not understand why different things happened in my life, but it wasn't in vain. Someone I know, someone I might not know, might be going through some of the same things. So I can share the things that I went through and hopefully help someone, even if it's just the mental part of it, to get through it. Some of these topics that we were touching on were very close, and we talk about memories and just being able to look back and understand that some of those situations weren't my fault, and so explaining that to the kids that are coming up that you can control whatever destiny you choose. After I left elementary school, I came to Houston, Texas. From that rural environment, I came to Houston, Texas. And I enrolled in Welch Middle School, and I remember it was just a very big change in environment, but I remember even though I was living with my father and I didn't have those rules that my grandmother had, I still had some of that instilled into me. So middle school was a rough time though. At that time, my mother, who was still incarcerated, she ended up passing away from HIV. Her heroin addiction followed her to prison, and she ended up contracting HIV there. And so she passed away when I was in 7th grade. And at that time, my aunt, the same aunt that had came to find us to get us out of adoption, she actually was moving away to Detroit, Michigan. So a lot of the people that I was leaning on and during that time seemed to be leaving. So middle school was a little bit different. High school was different. I'm trying to get to some of the happy parts, so excuse me if I'm fast forwarding some. But yeah, high school, I learned a lot. I went to one of the worst high schools in the country. There's a documentary called Dropout Nation, and it's about my high school. And it just talks about some of the struggles and some of the inner city lives. And it's the same stories that you hear over and over and over, but I had a lot of people that cared about me at that school. I had a lot of people that invested into me and my future. One in particular was the debate coach. I'm from inner city Houston, and I'm playing basketball, and I like rap music and all that stuff. And this debate coach, she sees that, and she's like, Derek, you could do this debate thing if you wanted to. I hear you. She said you're articulate, you're smart, you love to argue. She was like, so why don't you give this debate a try? So I appreciate teachers like her for getting me to think outside of the box and do different things that I normally wouldn't try. I also had a lot of help from, of course, a lot of my coaches. But how did I get to Lynchburg? That's one of the questions that I wanted to cover. How did I get to Lynchburg? It had a lot to do with a lot of the things that I went through growing up. I had just finished my senior year in high school. My brother, my next closest brother, unfortunately had made some bad decisions and just got sent away to prison. And I was not considering college. I was just happened to be in a gym in Houston, and the assistant coach, one of the coaches from Liberty University, was from Houston, and he just happened to be in a gym, and he was telling guys that he thought had, some type of potential. He was like, guys, I know you aren't thinking about, school over there, but there's a school in Virginia that I coach at that maybe you want to think about applying to. And I hadn't applied to any college, I hadn't done any FAFSA or anything like that, but I did apply. I applied to Liberty, that was the only college, and because of my SAT score, they said, hey, we'll pay for XYZ% of your scholarship, and that's how I started. So at that point, I wasn't expecting to be accepted, to be honest, so the letter caught me off guard, because I hadn't done any preparation, I didn't know how to get anywhere, and so I realized at that time that I would have to save up the money to go if I wanted to go. So I started working all types of odd-end jobs, doing what I could to save up for a one-way ticket. I bought a one-way ticket from Houston to Richmond, and I bought a one-way Greyhound from Richmond to Lynchburg. And I remember getting on the plane. That was the first plane I've ever been on, and I landed in Richmond from Houston, and I was like, this is not that bad. This is a major metropolitan area. I see skyscrapers, I see people, I see malls. This is gonna be okay. I made a good choice. And then I got on the Greyhound, and the Greyhound started pulling away to Lynchburg, Virginia. And I'm from Texas, where everything is flat. Houston, everything is flat. So this is my first time experiencing, the ups and downs. I'm nauseated, my ears are popping, and I'm trying to really figure out what have I done. And I think I felt, for the first time, scared and afraid. You realize you have just enough money for a 3-day stay at the Super 8, but I knew I wanted to change my environment. I knew if I stayed in Houston, the statistics show, I didn't know this at the time, but statistics show that if your parents were in prison and your siblings and your aunts and uncles, most of the people around me at some point in time or were still in prison. And so I just knew I wanted to change my environment, and I had no idea what I was getting into, no idea what Liberty was. I didn't know about a dress code. I showed up in a wife beater and some basketball shorts with these big R. Kelly earrings, and I thought that I was just going to regular college. I had no idea Liberty even had a dress code, so I had no idea what I was stepping into. But I share that for any of the youth out there, that might be wondering how they can get from whatever situations they might be to a different point in life. And it wasn't all great when I got to Liberty. I'll be honest. Once again, it was culture shock. Coming from the inner city to this southern Bible Belt and trying to understand how all that works together. And also even the weather. That was the first time I saw snow. I can literally remember my freshman year, the first time seeing snow. I looked up at my roommate and I said, this is the slowest rain I have ever seen. And, but unfortunately I used that as an excuse not to go to class. I didn't go to class, after it snowed for the rest of the semester, but that's another story. But I share that with anyone who might be in foster care or going through those situations, that it doesn't have to be a sad story. There can be some positives. I met my wife while I was at Liberty University, and I guess one of the things that always treasure about that is that she was a psychology major. So all of those things that I had been through, I was needing to unpack, and I hadn't really ever dove into some of those emotions and feelings. So how I got to Liberty, I used to think that I was just a bad mama jamma, and thinking about all the circumstances that I had to get through. But looking back, there was a lot of people that were helping me. There was a lot of divine intervention that I'm thankful for, because I know that there was just no coincidence that I ended up in Lynchburg of all places, because this is the only place that I applied for. But I've been here about 15 years. My wife is in the back with my 3 children. So on the flip side, some of those experiences with foster care, it let me know early on, the importance of family, what I wanted to do when I got older, how I wanted to be, how I wanted to have my family, how I wanted to share those experiences with my family. So even though there was some definite down times, I can appreciate the times that I have now with my family, and I can use that as something to really try to heal as I look back at some of those instances and try to understand from a parent's perspective what my parents were going through to have to, lose custody or whatever that is. So I hope I didn't ramble too much. I really wanted to touch on some of the things that she asked me, and hope you guys enjoyed the story.
There's just so much that there's no way in the world I could share all the experiences that would help you to understand what it was like to be a foster child. So I'm just going to focus on one that I know I can go through from mostly start to finish. So, where I'm originally from is from Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And for those of you that have ever seen that Rocky Mount sign heading out of Virginia, it's not that Rocky Mount. I would always get so excited because we'd be heading down 501. See, Rocky Mount is only like 59 miles. I'm like, yes. And my husband would always go, no, sweetie, that's Rocky Mount, Virginia. I'm from Rocky Mount, North Carolina, which is a whole 3.5 hours away. So, and it's not anything like Lynchburg. In Rocky Mount, there's a railroad track that splits the town in half, the good side and the bad side. And if any of my Facebook friends are out there watching and you're in Rocky Mount, you know I'm telling the truth. And so I was on the bad side of town. And unfortunately, I grew up in the projects in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And I don't know if it's unfortunate or not, because I really like the person that I am. And if I changed any of those things, then I probably wouldn't have turned out the way that I am. So, not unfortunately. Fortunately, I was born in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, in the projects, on the wrong side of the tracks. And my mom and my dad, they were together for about a hot minute. My dad went AWOL from the Army and his family because he decided he didn't like the Army. And I don't know if he decided he didn't like the family or not, but he didn't want to get caught. So he split. And it left my mom with me, and I had an older sister. She's 4 years older than me. My older brother, who's 2 years older than me. And my younger brother, who's 2 years younger than me. So we were like stepladder. And we all had different dads except for me and my younger brother. And then my mom, she is mentally ill. Textbook paranoid schizophrenic. So we spent a great deal of time in and out of foster care, all the way from before I was in kindergarten all the way through high school. And so there wasn't anything normal or steady or constant at all about our childhood. But at the time, I didn't know that. I mean, as an adult, I can look back and see that, but at the time, every bit of it was normal for me. And I'm not going to talk about all of the foster homes. They were pretty much all the same, not very nice people, and it wasn't very fun. And sometimes we were together as a family, but most of the time we were split up. I think my brother had it the easiest, the younger brother, because he was tiny. He was a baby and he was cute, and everybody wanted to hold the baby and take care of the baby. I was not. I was not a baby. I was a chubby little thing. So it was always hard to find clothes for me because I always had to wear husky clothes. And if you have any idea of finding husky clothes that many years ago, it's hard now, but at that time it was even worse. And so even though I was considered the cute little kid, it was a little difficult for me because I needed to be occupied a lot. My brain just went in so many different directions. I was always into something. I was a good kid, but I was always needing to be occupied. And people didn't know how to handle that. Until they started giving me crayons and things and coloring books, and that was pretty good for me. I remember one of the foster homes that I went to that stands out the most for me was it was in a place far away from where we lived. So like we lived in Rocky Mount, but one of the rural areas outside of it was like Pine Tops, which is like this little bitty middle of the nowhere kind of town. Back then it wasn't really a town. And my mom would always find us if we stayed in town. So she would go snatch us up from the foster home, and then they would have to take us back and put us in another home that she couldn't find us. So finally they decided to move us out of town. Now let me just describe to you, this is what it was like for me. I was in kindergarten. At this particular home, it was in a very rural area, and it was at the end of one of the streets that had no street lights. So when the lights in the house were off, it was pitch black. And I was the child that was totally afraid of the dark. Like, I hated the dark. As a matter of fact, I don't think I got over that until I got married. And my husband was very sweet to me. He would let me keep the light above the dresser on and all night long. It didn't bother him, but now, it's not such a big deal. But back then, oh my gosh, it was awful. And in the country, all kinds of noises happen, especially if you live on a farm. I lived on a farm. I had to do farm work. I picked tobacco. I mean, they got free labor out of us. We went to this particular foster home because they needed some farm help. That's what we were there for. So at 5, I remember picking potatoes. And I just want you to know, you have to go through a lot of worms and nasty potatoes to get good potatoes out of the ground. It's not fun. And then cucumbers. Did you know that cucumbers are very prickly? And they hurt your fingers when you pick them. And I remember tobacco. Being in the tobacco houses, and they would pull the tobacco a certain way. And we would get in and jump on them and make sure all the tobacco was pressed down. And then I remember our pay was like a soda and a moon pie. That was what we got paid for all that hard work. And we also had to get the chickens. Now, I never had to cut the head off of a chicken, thank God. But they always escaped from the hen house, and we would have to get up in the morning before school and wrangle them in. Well, I was afraid of chickens, terrified of them. I hate them to this day. I hate chickens. I will eat as many as I possibly can. We would have to get up in the morning and run after the chickens and put them back in the hen house. And do you know they will peck everything? They will peck at everything. And so I would just run around and pretend to chase the chickens, but never really actually, but don't get caught doing that because you get the tar beat out of you, which I did quite often because I wasn't very good at pretending to catch chickens. Well, the lady that was the foster mother, I just remember her being as round as she was tall. And she had very dark skin, and she would always have on a muumuu with no sleeves on it. And she did snuff, so she'd always have this big lump of snuff, and she'd always be spitting in something, the spittoon. And I remember she would always wear a wig when she was going to town. She put on her nice clothes and a nice coat and her little pocketbook and her wig. But when she took that wig off, it was very yucky, gray, nappy hair that was always flat, sticking here, there, and everywhere. And she was the scariest thing to me. I was terrified of her because she was so big. And she, you know, I learned when I had my oldest how you're supposed to talk to children. You're not supposed to yell at them, and you're not supposed to look down and yell at them because it's terrifying. You want to get down on their level if you want to talk to them, and so that you don't seem so intimidating. Well, she intimidated the devil out of me. And it was always yelling. She never spoke. She always yelled. And we had to sleep in a common area. There wasn't a bedroom for us. It was my sister, myself, and my youngest brother. At that point, my older brother had already gone to Florida to live with an aunt and an uncle that were supposed to take care of him because he was considered a troubled kid. He was a boy. He was just what boys do, but no one wanted to be bothered with that particular boy. So he went to go live in Florida while we were there. And I remember Gerard, my younger brother, he was still a baby, so he got babied and cuddled and all that wonderful stuff. And my sister and I, we just got put to work. Well, where we slept in the common area, anybody could walk through there day or night when we were in the room. So we never really had any privacy. And this particular family already had grandkids living there, and they had 2 other foster kids that lived there as well. So it was my sister, myself, and my brother. The 2 other foster kids who were older, they were like 16, 17-year-old boys. And then the granddaughters, they lived there. They were about our age, and they were always treated better than us because they were the real children. And I remember while we lived there and we did all this farm work and everything, it got to the point where one of the older foster children started molesting my sister and myself. And the worst part about it was, like, I didn't know what to do, but unfortunately at that point in my life, it wasn't like it was something new to me. Because I was the pretty little girl, it was really hard for me to even keep And it makes me angry to even think about it. Men would always put their hands on us, and it was just a normal part of life. We just accepted it. That's just the way that it was. But then, somehow, I don't know how, they found out that he was molesting us. And so I fast forward to the point where I remember seeing myself and my sister next to me in a municipal building. I'm assuming it was the courthouse. And then the foster lady, Mrs. Smith, was sitting next to me. And I remember the terrazzo-style floor that was there in front of me. And she kind of elbowed me as I was sitting there next to her, and she said, "Here he comes now, and I need you to make sure that you look at him and you say sorry for making him have to go through this." And I just remember looking, with tears in my eyes, him coming with his hands behind his back, and two, I think they were police officers. They could have been court people, I don't know. And he was walking toward us, and I looked at my sister, and I looked at him, and I looked at her, and she was just like, "I better say it or else, because I'm going to get a whipping if I don't." And we apologized to him, which is so funny to me now. We had to apologize to him for what he had done to us. That's logical. And then I just remember looking down again and feeling so ashamed that I was sitting there and everybody knew what happened because of what she said, what he did. Everybody they must know I'm this horrible person because I made him go through this. And from that point forward, for quite a while, I thought I had this dirty little secret that I needed to keep to myself and not let anybody know. And then, after we were sent back home, I'm sitting here thinking about it, and it never really dawned on me until I got older. How does my mom feel to know that she's mentally ill, she can't control herself sometimes, and her children had to go through those things, And no, we didn't have a CASA volunteer to help us through that situation. We had that evil biddy sitting next to us the whole time. And that one it wasn't the first time, it wasn't the last time. It was one of the multiple places that we had to stay. How would I describe my overall experience in foster care? It was like the worst. It was the worst. We didn't have anybody that actually ever asked us how we were doing or asked us what was going on in the home that we were staying in. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. All they cared is that my mom couldn't get to us when she wanted to. That's all that I can remember. Let me think. Not once, not ever did we ever get asked how we were doing. It was just shuffle the kids to a new home whenever they need to be moved because either the people were tired of dealing with us or my mom found us. My sister, my younger brother, and myself, we stayed together pretty much most of the time. But when I got older and I had to go back into foster care because my mom stayed sick, she was always being committed. And some of those stories, those I can't even go into right now because I don't have that much time. But when I got older, my oldest sister, she aged out, so she didn't have to go. She went off and lived on her own. But my younger brother and I, we ended up having to go back into foster care. And he was so rambunctious and so volatile. He was just so angry that he ended up fighting with one of the foster kids, and he got sent to another home. And I always say he got sent to heaven and I got sent to hell. Because he get to go to Disney World and he got to have fancy clothes and have fun, and I was stuck just doing like the worst labor you could probably imagine. And throughout the entire time, like Derek, my grades were stellar. I was an amazing student, an amazing artist, and I didn't even realize it at the time. And I just did what I was supposed to do. When you go to school, you learn. You do your homework. You study. You just do. It's what you're supposed to do. So that's what I did. And I didn't ever get to see my sisters or my brothers while I was in foster care once we split up. The only time I got to see them is whenever we would go back home. And it says, how did my life unfold after I left foster care? So how I ended up leaving foster care. I think the reason why I never went back to foster care again after I got in high school, in the 11th grade, I got pregnant. And it wasn't anything special or any kind of relationship or anything. No one ever said don't have unprotected sex. No one ever said, you know, I didn't have any rules. I just did what I wanted to do. Lucky for me, what I wanted to do didn't involve drugs or alcohol. It just involved sex. And I got pregnant. And so in my 11th grade, when I had my daughter, it was between the 11th grade and the 12th grade. And then once I had her, I went right back to school. And I was like the only person at school that was a total computer nerd. Computers had just come out. So I was able to work for the school half a day because they didn't know how to use the computers the way that I did. And I did everything they needed me to do because teachers really just were fighting computers. And then the other part of the day, I took classes. In my senior year, I only needed to take 4. So I only had 4 classes that I needed to knock out. And then when I went home, I would work at Hardee's part-time so that I could pay for childcare. And then when my mom got sick again, I ended up moving to Wilmington, North Carolina, to live with my sister who had gotten married and moved down there. And while I was there, I met my husband, who was a Marine in Camp Lejeune, and he's from here. So we ended up meeting. He brought me here to live, and it was one of the best things that ever happened because, you know, my whole life, I mean, you can't watch television and not know what family is supposed to be like. You just can't. I mean, if all you do, if the only education you get is on TV, which I didn't. I used to read voraciously. That was my escape. That's one of the things I forgot to say. I could probably read 12, 13 books a week. That was my thing. When I was in school, I would go to the library all the time, check out as many books as I could, and escape to the book world. That was my life. So even if I didn't read any books, if all I ever did was watch television, you can't not know what family is supposed to be like simply through watching television. And so I knew that I wanted that Cosby family. You know, I wanted a family like that. I knew I didn't want that married with children family. Didn't want that. I knew that I wanted a house. We never lived in a house. My mom couldn't afford a house. We lived in the projects forever. I knew that I wanted, you know, my children not to ever have to go to foster care because of all the things that I had to go through. And I knew I wanted to keep my kids safe. So when my husband and I, we would talk about these things before we even talked about marriage. We talked about all the things we wanted. I mean, he had a rough childhood as well. I mean, he never lived in a house either. So when we got married and we moved here, and we bought our house, we had like the best neighbors. We had, I mean, it's not a big house and it's not a perfect house and it definitely wouldn't make Southern living, but it was our home. And we raised up kids there. And you know what? Your kids don't always grow up to do what you want them to do, but they can never say that we did not have a wonderful environment for them to live in. They can never say that mom and dad didn't care about them. And they can never say they ever had to spend time in a foster home with people that abused them. And another thing is, how did your past experiences impact your life today? How did my past experiences impact my life today? Here's what they did for me. I don't trust anybody with my kids. I don't trust anybody with my grandkids. Like, my daughter, she had it so hard. Like, they would have sleepovers and like I'd say, well, you can go to the party for a little while, but you have to come home. I can't let you spend the night there. And my son, you know, my husband wouldn't let me do that for my son. Well, she had, but he wouldn't. He would go spend the night at, and I would be sick to death worrying what might be happening to my son while he was out. And my daughter, she said to me not too long ago that she appreciated the fact that I was such a, I don't think I would say I'm a helicopter mom. I wouldn't say that. But I was him. Yeah, I was very protective, very protective. And I think to the point where it was almost paranoid. It was pretty bad. And I just, you know, that's just one of those things that has never left me, that I trust nobody with my children. My husband and I had my daughter when we got married, so when my son came along, we had a baby, and we had a 6-year-old, 8-year-old, 6-year-old. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't go on dates because I didn't know anybody to babysit for me. I was new to Lynchburg, and I didn't trust anybody. I didn't know anybody. So we didn't go on dates unless we went back to Wilmington where my sister was or where my best friend was, and they would babysit while we went out. Otherwise, we didn't date. We didn't go out on a date. We had no time alone because we were always with the kids. But aside from that paranoid thing, I don't think it really had that much of an impact on me. But what I will say is that it had a lot of impact on a lot of people that I met, because in the beginning I thought it was my dirty little secret, some of the things that happened to me. But when I heard that these things were happening to other people and they felt like it was their fault, I was able to share so many experiences with so many people and help them to understand that whatever happened wasn't because of them. I have been able to talk to other foster children that were going in a bad direction or acting out or misbehaving, and some of them I would just, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? You have good foster parents. Why are you behaving this way? You know, I would let them know that they needed to get their stuff together because these people are actually good, and you might end up being shipped somewhere where the people are not. So, and I apologize, that voice you're hearing is my granddaughter. It's like, Carrie, be quiet. I have been able to talk to quite a few foster kids. Some of them were at church with us. I remember one little boy, he had the best foster parents. They were just the sweetest couple. And he would come in primary every week and be like this little hellion and wanted to destroy and just distract, and he was just awful. One day I snatched him up and took him to the door, and I said to him, you have got to knock it off. I said, you've got this wonderful family that has taken such good care of you. I do not understand why you're behaving this way. And I mean, I was in his face, and I got down on his level. And I was in his face, and I said to him, I was in a foster home, I was in a lot of them, and believe you me, it was not as easy as what you have it. I said, just think, you might get snatched out of this place and put somewhere you're not going to be very happy. If you don't change your ways, you're going to regret it. Next Sunday, he comes in, was the perfect little gentleman, and I was in shock. He actually listened to something I said. And I want you to know when and it was like a year or so later, when he finally left to go back, he gave me a big hug. He was so sweet to me, and it just about broke my heart that he was leaving. I mean, but the end result is you want them to go back to their families, but sometimes being with the family is not always the right thing, because you're taking them from a bad situation and putting them in a positive situation, and to know that sometimes they may have to go back to the bad situation is heartbreaking. But that's the way it is, and that's what the CASA volunteers are for. I think I shared everything that I wanted to share with you. I don't think that there is any other life-changing thing that I could possibly say other than, you know, like I said earlier, everything that I went through was pretty difficult. The only sunlight that I had in my life was when I got married and I had my family. It's like the best thing that has ever happened to me. But I know I appreciate that so much more now because of all that I had to go through before, you know? And like I said, I wouldn't change any of it because it's all an experience that helped me to become who I am. And I'm pretty, you know, aside from I could probably lose a few pounds. Other than that, but I'm trying to hold on to it because it fills in the wrinkles. But other than that, you know, I wouldn't change anything. I love who I am. I love what I'm doing with my life. I love my family. I mean, I don't think that I'd change anything. And that's it. That's all I have to share with you.
Thank you guys so much. I don't know that I'm going to be able to look at you two the same anymore, because right now in my mind, you're chasing chickens around, and Derek's trying to take care of them and clean them up. But thank you guys for sharing your stories. It's amazing. Is this on too?
You might have to turn it on. And Adam, I did a terrible job of introducing people, so Derek kind of said who he was, but can you tell us a little bit, who are you in the community now? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so we'll get into that.
Okay,
so you got to hear a little bit about their stories, and so, or at least part of it, and I think it was the hard part, but I think there's a lot more to these two, and so can you guys tell me where you're at now? Like, what sort of things are you involved with? And I guess we can start with like your name and that sort of thing as well, since I heard a lot about you.
He just said age before beauty. Just kidding. My name is Tarsha Joyner. I swear I said that, but I guess maybe I didn't. And most people call me Mrs. Joy because I own Mrs. Joy's Absolutely Fabulous Treats. It's a ridiculous thing.
And can you stop for 1 second? If you have not been there, you need to go because it is amazing.
It's absolutely fabulous.
Yeah.
Thank you. I went to school here 3 different times, CVCC twice, and then I went to Lynchburg College, and I graduated from there. That's the whole reason why I opened my shop. And I also, and this is the thing that everybody wants to hear, I was on Food Network twice, but it only counts once because I only won once.
My name is Derek Polley. Like I said when I was speaking, I came here in 2002 to go to Liberty, graduated business management, focused in finance. Today I'm a financial advisor. Before that, I started a professional basketball team here called the Lynchburg Legends. I did that for 5 years, so that was kind of my baby in college. So that's how I got to know a lot of people in the community. And currently I serve on the Lynchburg City School Board. This is my 3rd year, so we're currently trying to lock down a top-notch superintendent for the city of Lynchburg. So hopefully we can bring that home here soon. It's a little bit about me.
Yeah, you guys can keep them. I'm passing back and forth the last questions. All right, so we're going to bring it back a little bit again. While you were in foster care, what kind of perceptions maybe did you have of yourself as being in foster care, or what you feel like people thought about you? What did it cross your mind?
Yeah, it crossed my mind. I remember just wondering how my parents let these situations occur where me and my brother were taken. I didn't understand the police and the everything that was going on, but just wondering how did we get there. I remember people having that stigma of most people in foster care, either your parents are on drugs or you were being abused. Well, unfortunately, some of that was true in my case, but I remember just feeling that shame, not really feeling like I was connected with anyone, and just trying to understand really what my place was.
I remember when I was a kid, it didn't bother me. You know, I just thought everything was normal. But when I got older and I was in high school, it was the worst because, I mean, kids are cruel anyway. And then you're going to be the fat kid and the nerd. And then on top of that, you're a foster kid. I don't think very many people in the high school knew that I was a foster kid. And I tried very hard to hide it. But I just remember going to school one day and I had just been taken out of the home and put into foster care again. And I just remember going to the bathroom and bawling my eyes out because it was just the most stressful thing. And then I sucked it up and dealt with it. And that was it. I mean, that's what you do.
What you guys described pretty challenging situations. I think we are pretty lucky here in Lynchburg. There's a lot of really good foster parents. But I want to ask you guys, what would have made your situation better? Knowing in the situation that you're in, what are some things that would have improved it? Because we do have a lot of professionals here and a lot of CASA volunteers as well. So what's something that they might could do for some of the youth or kids that they're working with that would have made your lives better, or you wish had happened?
I know that one of the things that did make my life better was the fact that I had these teachers. I had some of the best teachers at school. I think that's part of the reason why I learned learning so much, because of the teachers I had. I had this one teacher in kindergarten. She would put all the kids down for a nap, and then she would take me to the front of the classroom and undo my hair and comb it and rebraid it and say such nice things about me. She was like the sweetest lady ever. And I had another teacher like that in another elementary school that I ended up moving to. It seemed like, except for the middle school experience, after that, I had an art teacher that she was like what do you call it? One of those tree hugger, Woodstock kind of people. Hippie, that's it. Art became this thing for me because she was there. And she made it seem like we were all so talented, but it wasn't just like it was collective, it was like each individual. So each of those teachers helped me, through. If I'd have had at least one foster parent that had been like that, it would have made life a lot better. But to have someone ask, how's things going, would have made a lot of difference too, I'm sure.
So people just investing time and showing interest.
Yeah, I mean, that's what all children need. All children need that. We are not farm workers. Some of us are more than others, those that cut the heads off of chickens.
I don't regret those chicken times, that was some good chicken. So
you should be your hero, right? Because you hated all the chickens.
But, kind of just piggybacking off of what she said, I can definitely remember some great teachers. One in particular, when I moved back to the rural part of Texas, Center Texas, with my grandmother, her name was Miss Cadell. And Miss Cadell lived on my street. So it was a lot of interaction with Miss Cadell, but I guess she taught my father. So she taught my father years ago. So she saw, and my father played the trumpet, and he was very musically inclined. I didn't have a musical bone in my body. I loved music, I was around music, but it was interesting. She would take me after school and she would get me interested in, enroll me in these academic bowls where we would do spelling tests and we would do math, where we would do fun ways to do, quick ways to do math and different ways to do advanced math. But one particular thing she did, she would make me listen to classical music. And she would make me memorize the composer. She would make me memorize all these different things about different pieces of classical music, and then it was a competition she would take me to locally. I don't know if it was a town thing or a regional thing, but I would have to go and compete with other students on memorizing this classical music. So now when I'm watching commercials and some classical music is playing, I know it's Hoedown Rodeo or I know it's Appalachian Spring, but she really just invested that much into me, and just gave me that connection. And so I can just piggyback on what she said. If someone just invested that time, if the caregiver that I was with had just one time asked me, hey, what's going on? How do you feel about your mom? What do you remember? Are there anything you want to talk about? But everything was kind of pushed under the rug, and had to kind of unpack that as an adult.
Okay, so moving forward, you both kind of said similar answers in that someone that really wanted to know how you were doing. In that season in life, and I don't know how easy it will be to look back, do you think you would have been receptive to it or guarded, or what sort of things would have taken down some of the walls that might have been up?
I think I would have probably shut it down in the beginning. You would have probably have to do some extensive digging to really get me to get past it, because I think she hit on a good point, which was you just go in the bathroom, you cry a little bit, and then you suck it up. You learn how to deal. That's kind of, in my case, it was the be a man syndrome. Men don't cry, men don't show emotions. I know you miss your mom, but you suck it up. That's kind of what was drilled into me. So anytime anything would present itself, that's kind of what I would show at first. And I was humorous at times, so I would use a little bit of comedy sometimes to kind of distract people from different things that was going on in my life. But ultimately, I felt once you got to know me, you could see that I was really hurting. I just look back at some of the pictures that I took during that time, and that's just not a picture of a happy child. That's a picture that my face was telling a lot, but no one was really asking.
I don't think that I would shut anybody down. That was normal for me. I thought everybody had life like I did. So if anybody had asked a question, I'd have been pretty open about it. I would have answered it, and I would have talked about whatever they asked me to talk about, because it was just life. It was just what you do. So, but I wasn't like him. I was a girl. Boys are a little harder to crack than girls can be sometimes. But I don't know. I guess I never know, because nobody ever did just simply ask.
So one of the questions on here that we're going to discuss is maybe some myths about foster care. Are there anything that...
Well, it's all true. No.
Is there anything that you felt like, people kind of believe this, but it's not really that kind of way?
I don't know what kind of myths there are out there about foster care, I can't even imagine. What kind of stuff do people say?
They didn't say it.
I know. In our situation, every bit of what was out there floating around probably would have been true. But nowadays, I expect that, I'm hoping that the situation is better.
Yeah. You mentioned that, you escaped into books. To cope with things, right? So, but other than that, how would you say your education was affected by the situation that you're in?
I think I'm a different kind of bird than most kids, because, I just assume you get on the bus, you go to school to learn. And that's what I did. I took that job very seriously, because I thought that's what you were supposed to do. I was very obedient, except for that one time. But, it's what you do. But I'm just one of those people that I just absorb knowledge, and I love it, and I loved school. So yeah, I was going to be a good kid. But if I didn't like school, I could see how being in and out of the foster system would, mess up the grades. I see how that happen.
Or even, some of the foster youth that I encounter often attend many different schools.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know all the schools I went to.
Okay.
I probably went to about 5 elementary schools, maybe more. There was only 2 high schools in Rocky Mount, and I was always on the side of town that required me to go to Rocky Mount Senior High, thank goodness, because nobody wanted to go to Northern Nash. But then, back then kids were getting bused. So it didn't matter where I lived or middle school, I was still going to get bused at that schools, because they wanted to mix the kids up. So by the time I got to middle school, it was pretty steady, but I don't even know how many elementary schools I went to.
Okay. Yeah, same question. Yeah, it was just how did being in foster care affect your education? And it can be whether it's your grades or stability in placements, how many schools you went to, that sort of thing. Just how did it impact your educational upbringing?
Since mine was primarily during the elementary years, I do remember between pre-K, first grade, and second grade, like 6, 7, just different places, being around, bouncing around. That's why and I don't say this in a bragging manner, when I went back to look at my records, we just happened to, my wife and I were looking at my grades from elementary school to show my children, and I was not expecting to see, 96, 98, 97, 96, nothing below a 96 for all of my elementary years, because we had bounced around so much. I remember specifically 4 different first grade teachers, 3 different just different places. But like she said, school was always something to look forward to compared to the environments where we were. School was something something I could cling on to, and I always enjoyed learning. Like she said, learning was fun. And I just remember always being in advanced classes. I remember always wanted to take on second languages. I'm fluent in Spanish. I remember wanting to do those things, not because I felt like I had to. So, yeah.
So despite having a lot of transition, you were still able to cling to education.
Yes, through support. Like I said, my grandmother laid that solid foundation. Once again, we had remarkable teachers that were helping out. So in my younger days, I used to think that I was just some superstar that was doing it all by myself. I had some academic talent, but I did have, like we mentioned, some amazing people to help me support. So I'm appreciative of that.
Actually, go ahead and pass it, because this next question is for you. All right. Tarsha, you mentioned a few times that you're glad that you went through what you went through. That you are who you are today because of the things that you encountered. So what were some of the things that adequately trained you or prepared you for the life that you have now that you had to experience while you were in foster care?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things. I'm going to make a joke about this one though. So as a small business owner, you get to have people review you whether it's appropriate or not. And having developed the thick skin as a child to deal with all the crud from all the foster homes, you can deal with some of the worst reviewers so much easier because some people are mean and malicious for no reason, over a cookie even, and it gets ugly. But it's like, I mean, if I internalize all that stuff, I go crazy. So I've learned how to not internalize every little thing. Not to say sister doesn't get ghetto every now and then, because I do have my mother in me. I am my mother's daughter. Thank God I'm not the crazy side too often. But I have learned how to deal. I have very good coping mechanisms that I have honed over the years because of what I had to go through.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to ask you the same question, Derek, as well, but I want to follow up with that. Do you think you were able to use those coping mechanisms when you were younger, or do you think you kind of realized them?
Well, you
or
know,
when do you think you realized them?
I remember I told you I hated being in the dark.
Yeah. With
a passion. And you learn very early on that you don't cry about it because you just get a whipping for it. I don't understand that. If I'm already crying, why are you going to whip me to make me cry even harder? That just is not logical. But I learned that I needed to deal with the darkness issue. Did I stop being afraid of the dark? No. But I learned that I needed to keep my mouth shut and just deal with it for however long I had to deal with it, because the situation wasn't going to change. Children are so easy to adapt to a situation. And because I was forced to adapt to so many different situations, I feel like now, as an adult, I can do the same thing because I trained myself. I mean, I was trained very early on to do it. And I noticed that there are a lot of people that have wonderful childhoods and never had any trials to have to deal with. But as an adult, whether you like it or not, there are going to be trials that you're going to have to deal with. And if you haven't learned how to cope and how to deal, life is going to be very difficult.
All right, Derek, same question for you. What sort of things throughout foster care or maybe even during childhood do you feel like help prepare you now as an adult? What are some of the challenging things that you had to go through that makes you who you are now?
Well, it's kind of difficult looking back. I know being separated from my brother was one of the things I touched on as being one of the hardest things that I went through during foster care. Being separated from my brother and kind of having to learn how to deal on my own. As I look back, that situation kind of presented itself after my childhood, again, my senior year in high school, when my brother was sent to jail, and we were separated again. And I kind of had to figure out like what I needed to do. I had to think for myself. He was always someone I could lean on. He was always teaching me things, always, giving me instruction. But he was making certain decisions that I shouldn't have been following. And so being able to have to make those decisions and think for my own, even at 6 and 7, and then having to do that again when it was time for me to make the decision to leave Houston, because he was a big part of that decision. And I honestly think that maybe if my brother hadn't been incarcerated, I might not have left. I might not have wanted to change my environment. I might not have seen a different way out. So I hate that he had to go that route, but being able to think on my own, and not just with my brother, same thing with my father, my mother, my aunts, and everyone else who had went down that path, understanding that I have to think for myself. I have to take control of what I can do, and I can't blame my environment or people around me for the decisions that I need to make.
Okay. So we do have some folks from social services here, as well as some foster families. what advice would you give to a foster parent who is working with foster kids?
From my personal experience, if there are siblings, if there are other family members that you can have, that the child can still have a connection with, do your best to investigate that and seek that out to the fullest, because that can really help a child when it comes to those, when it comes to stability, when it comes to the emotions and different things of that nature. Being separated from everyone that you know is terrifying. So having someone, as she was saying, just to simply ask, you know, do you want to see your brother? Have you thought about your brother? Just simple questions like that would have made a world of difference. So I would pledge for anyone that's involved with the foster care, just from my point of view, to encourage, strengthen relationships with the family to make sure that those things go on, because you never know how much time you have with a particular family member.
Same question for you. Yeah. So if you could give some advice to a foster family who currently has some foster children in their home, what would you tell them? What do they need to know to be the best foster parents that they can be?
I don't know what I would say. Treat them like they're your children, not like there's some burden that you have to, you know, or let me just say this. This is off subject, but not as much
Go ahead,
as you
it's
think.
your floor.
I remember I had this lady that I used to consider a friend. I no longer consider her a friend because of this incident. Started at the grocery store, and we used to work together. And she's, you know, had different health issues, so now she doesn't work in the same place anymore. But I remember her saying to me, I asked her how she was dealing, you know. And she said, well, money's kind of tight, but I talked to some of the people at church, and they were saying I should get a foster child so that I can make some extra money. And I looked at her like, that's not why you become a foster parent. You don't become a foster parent so you can make extra income. You become a foster parent because you care, because you want to help someone, and not because they're going to be some source of income. And I just mentally cut her off at that point because I was so ticked off. But I couldn't say what I wanted to say at that point. And I will eventually, but I had to calm down before I could speak to her about it. I just kind of moved over and prayed that she wouldn't get a foster kid because of her health issues. But when you become a foster parent or you become a volunteer, you do this because you care, because you want to help, and not because you need money. And then also, some of these kids, like, I would have been the ideal kid to get because I was a really good kid. I really was. But some of these kids, they have issues, like major issues, and they don't know how to cope, and so they act out. And it's going to be hard, but some children are just difficult, and you just have to learn how to have the patience of Job and understand where they're coming from and try to figure out how to help them to overcome the acting out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just what you were saying about being able to understand the kids. In my role with the school board, I sit on the discipline committee. And of course, a lot of the discipline issues that we face are from kids who are in foster situations. And we have an unbelievable homeless situation with the children here in Lynchburg as well. So me being able to sit on the committee and also have shared in some of these experiences, I have a different type of empathy for a child. Not saying that I'm going to make any excuse for any disruptive behavior, but I can kind of curve the conversation at times to help them understand, give them a little bit more insight that there might be some other things that we might need to investigate before we decide to suspend a child for 365 days. Because what good is that going to do to place a kid that's already in an unstable situation out of school for 365 days? So sometimes the experiences that we have, you never know what role you'll serve later on in life. So I'm grateful for those experiences to give me some insight for some of those children, because I don't feel like that we just need to keep suspending them and taking advantage of them in the discipline.
What about to foster kids themselves? We are recording this right now. And there may be several foster parents watching this from their homes, because getting out the house with a bunch of kids can be hard sometimes. But if you could talk directly to them and give them a message about what it's like on the other side, what would you tell kids that are currently in foster care? You got, I mean, there's big goods out there, I think.
You know what I would say is that, you know what, you don't feel like you have a whole lot of control in your life right now. You don't have any control over where you are. You don't have any control over who your parents are or who your foster parents are. But it's not going to always be that way. It is not going to always be that way, and one day you are going to be in control. So you need to lay the foundation now so that when you are in control, you're in a good position to take your life in a positive direction as opposed to some of the directions that could be taken when you're out of control. Does that make sense? Like, control is a huge thing. And the only thing that they have control over as a foster kid is themselves. Nothing else. But when you get older, it changes. And they just need to understand there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And the tunnel may seem long, but there still is an end to it. It's not going to always be this way.
To the foster parents, I would say to seriously consider the mental health side of what the child might be going through, the trauma and different things that some of these children are facing, similar to what her and I faced. I know I didn't deal with it until I was an adult, and there were certain situations growing up where I was acting out. You know, I was hanging with the wrong crowd, making some very poor decisions. Thankfully, those decisions didn't land me with any type of record, any type of jail time. But I think that the mental health issue, as far as being able to peel back some of those layers, unpack some of those emotions, understand why the anger might be there, understand, you know, from a psychological viewpoint, what the child might be going through, how they're looking at you, you know, based on past experiences. I encourage them to seek that out because I know that's on the rise, as I see with all the youth in Lynchburg City. So that's something that I would stress.
How about to the kids directly, the kids in foster care?
Oh, to the kids,
what would you tell them?
That preparing, that what you're going through now and the education and some of the things you might seem, like she said, might seem like you're not in control, but there's not going to be an excuse once you become an adult. You know, I would love to say that I was able to tell my story and life just unrolled in front of me, but when you become an adult, people might not be able to relate with some of the things that you've been through. They might not have as much empathy. So you need to prepare yourself to be in the best position so you can take advantage of life however it presents itself, because you never know where you're going to be, you know, and what you're going to do. Some of the people, some of the teachers, some of the hopefully CASA volunteers that are reaching out to you, reach back out to them. Understand that they are there as an asset. Her and I, unfortunately, didn't have those people that are there. But if you are in a situation where you have somebody where you can talk to, confide in, maybe that can provide some counseling, understand that there are people that want to help you. You know, you're not in this all the way alone. You do have might have some trust issues like her and I have, but there are some people that do want to sincerely see you succeed.
I'm going to ask you about a couple more people to give advice to. So a lot of times, you know, the system, right, gets a bad rap. And what we're talking about is like judges, social workers, teachers, CASA, all these people that are the system. What would you tell people that are part of that, or you know, what advice would you give them and how to work with the kids that they serve that might be in foster care?
I always have to go first. You know, as an example, and I know we don't have much time left. How much time do you have? Okay, so this is another aside that is going to bring me back around to it. As a member of my church, I had this position at church in the women's organization where if people needed food or if they needed help at home, we would provide that help, but I needed to be able to go into the home to make sure that they actually needed it. And some people were like, well, you're not coming to my house and looking at my cabinets, and I'm like, well, then you're not getting any help. Because I needed to be able to check out the situation and make sure, see, I'm a good steward over money, especially when it comes to my church, because I put a great deal of it into it. So I need to make sure that if you need the help, I have to check it out and make sure. And so that's how I did my job. And I was the one that always checked out and made sure that the person genuinely needed help. And then I shopped for them like I was shopping for my own family. I have been in court situations where I've seen, and this is just me being in court for whatever reason, and I'll see a judge make a decision over a child, and nobody's even checked out the home situation. You don't know which parent is lying. You don't know what's going on. And you're sitting up here on this bench, and you're making these decisions, and nobody's checked the daggone thing out. It infuriates me to see that happen. And I know that there's so many people that have to be taken care of. There's so many things that have to be done. But when it comes to the life of a child and their well-being, it's worth it to take that time and actually do it. You know, people need to go check out both home situations before they assign who needs to go live where. And if a child is, you know, in trouble or in need, doesn't matter how much time, doesn't matter how much money it costs. We're talking about the life of a child. So for me, the people in the system just need to make sure that they always check everything. I don't care how much time it costs, or how much money it costs, or how much time it takes. They need to be checked on.
So 2 more questions for you, Derek. One, how do you think your life could have been different if there was a CASA involved? And then my last question, I'll get you a chance to go viral here in a minute. But I'll ask you about the CASA first.
Okay, so the first
Yeah, so the first one is, how would have things been different if there was a CASA?
If there was a CASA, I feel like maybe someone would have asked that important question, how are you? How are you doing? What's your situation like? When my mother passed away and my custody was given to my father, I think that there could have been a CASA volunteer involved with that situation, because I don't think my father was in the best position necessarily to be granted custody, you know, from coming from prison where he was at. So no one actually looked into that. The judge just was, let's give him back to the father. And so I can completely relate with what you were saying, that, you know, they need to take every instance seriously, because it is my life. And I'm grateful that I wasn't tempted to go on different paths. Did get caught going down different paths. But that some of that was luck, and I don't think that I could have seriously been had a record, you know, things that would have followed me for the rest of my life based on decisions because of whose custody I was granted to. So I definitely can agree with what she was saying, to investigate each one thoroughly.
Okay. And how about you? No? Pass?
I already answered that question.
Okay. All right. So here's your time to shine, Derek. All right. No. So here we go. I'm going to read it verbatim so I don't have to go viral. We know there is systematic inequality in many of our systems. How do you think race impacts the foster care system or experience, if at all?
Well, when parents are incarcerated, as in my case, they can't serve as caregivers. I don't know the statistic, but there's a direct correlation between parents being incarcerated and kids ending up in foster care. And the race comes in with the disproportionate amount of time that minorities receive for the same crimes that others receive less time for. My mother, who was joyriding and had some drug charges, her third offense, she was facing 25 years. So she was just on 1/3 of that. So even after she passed away, she still had time left on that. So I think looking back, she needed therapy. She needed, you know, intervention. She needed someone to step in. Not making any excuses for her, but now to see that, you know, the 2017 heroin opiate epidemic is being met by rehabilitation and therapy. Those are things that we're going viral, but yeah.
You're saying how now in 2017 we have more of a rehabilitative approach rather than punishment.
Right, and it's just I can't help but look at it from now that the epidemic is hitting different areas and different demographics. It seems like the approach seems to be less legislative. My parents were met with the Rockefeller laws, with very strict, harsh legal laws for drug use. So I think that you just can't help but acknowledge that now that the heroin epidemic is moving to the more affluent, different demographic, it's being met with a completely different approach. So it's interesting to see some of that. But I think the amount of time that minorities are given compared to others has a direct influence on how they end up, on how some certain children, because as I was saying, my mother was facing 25 years.
Your turn.
I'm almost afraid to answer.
This is why we have tonight, to
So,
listen.
I can't look at my experience and say that it would have been any different if I was a white kid, because I never really knew any white kids that were in foster care. And I remember the first time that I mentioned on Facebook that I had been a foster child, one of the kids that I went to high school with, well, we were in high school together, we were in elementary school, all the way through. She's a pretty little thing, and she's a white kid, and she'd been adopted. She'd been in foster care, and she'd been adopted, and she was, in a rich neighborhood and had the best of everything, and our two experiences were totally different. So I guess it could have been different if I'd have been a white kid, but I can't really say that it would have been, because I never really experienced any white foster kids. But the other thing that I'm going to say, and this might get my race card pulled, but when I was a kid, aside from that one teacher that was in elementary school that used to do my hair, anybody else in my life that helped me and did things for me and tried to move me in a positive direction were white people. It wasn't brown people. My own family wouldn't help us out at all. We had plenty of family in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. They didn't want to deal with Minnie's children. None of them helped us. They could have. They knew my mom. They saw her situation and they just kind of turned a blind eye. We never were helped by any of our family. And most of the teachers that I went to after that particular one that helped me the most were white people. So I can't say that the race, my race, I'm sure that it probably would have changed things if I were a little white kid. But I can't say that it at that time, foster care was just foster care. But again, I don't know, because I only experienced my life.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing, and I believe we've got another couple of minutes to do some questions in the audience.
Hi, I'm a foster and adoptive mom, and I was wondering if either of you had any advice on how we can honor the connections with our foster and adoptive kids' biological parents as we come together and try to form a new family.
I would say it just depends on where they came from, because some people need to just be cut off. Some people need to just be cut off and pretend like they never existed. I mean, that's just the way it is. I still deal with my mom on the daily basis, who's still paranoid schizophrenic totally, and something people don't even know is that the weekend that I opened my shop, my mom had a breakdown, and at the same time something else major was happening. I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown myself that weekend. Some people you just need to cut off. I don't know what your situation is, but to me, if the situation was bad enough for your children to be taken away from you in the first place, obviously, you really shouldn't be making that kind of a connection. Let them do that when they get old enough to know what's going on, when they get old enough to care about such a thing. Some people you just need to stay away from. If it's a dog and he's going to bite you every time you put your hand out, you know to stay away from that dog. That's all I got to say about that one.
perspective, after my mother was incarcerated in the early 80s and contracted HIV, a lot of my family tried to hide her. They did not want to acknowledge. There's a lot of shame and everything in that. And even with the foster care situation, as I go back and ask my aunts and different people who were involved, there was a level of secrecy that you mentioned how your mother would come and find you guys in different places. So there was a level of almost like hiding us very close to her, so she would not be able to do that. So I agree that if the dog is going to bite you, you need to keep them at bay. What was hard for me to accept was they were keeping me at bay for those few years of life that my mom had left. So I was not able to enjoy some of the later years of my mom's life because people in that foster situation, different people in my family, felt that they were protecting me. And I think a lot of them had some good intentions. I don't think that there was any malintention, but looking back, I do realize that the later part of my mom's life, I was not able to be a part of. So but I'm not saying that to combat what she said, just given, but how would they have known that? You know, no one will assume that my mother would pass away that fast, but that's kind of a different perspective, just to give you a little yin and yang.
So to speak. One of my questions is, sometimes when we get the call that children are coming into care, we have a very short window of time before, as we're trying to make the most appropriate placement for a child in a foster home. Assuming they're appropriate and kind and they're going to meet their needs, what would you say is the most important thing to consider when making a placement? Is it siblings, school stability? What would you say is the single most important thing for us to focus on if we can't meet all of those?
Definitely siblings. I was going to say that was the most traumatic experience that I can remember. Besides the way everything kind of went down, was being separated from my brother. I can still remember that scene of us being, going in different directions. So, and the fact that no one ever mentioned him or asked about him, even acknowledged the fact that I had a brother, I would definitely say if there was any potential to keep that connection with a sibling, even if they can't be together, that would definitely be my number one priority.
And to follow up on that, so Tarsha, when you and I were talking a little bit earlier, you had mentioned that I think could be relevant for someone who's actually doing the removal or taking the children to the new home. Yeah, can you go a little bit into what was part of what made the removal so traumatic? What would have made it better or easier?
Okay, so when she's talking about the story I told her about one night my mom was, we were little, the baby, the 2-year-old, the 4-year-old, the 6-year-old. My mom had a breakdown. The police were there. The social worker came to check out to see what was going on. She was just there to suss out the situation, and then she went. But shortly after she left, the police came back, like probably a few minutes, because she obviously reported that my mom had a breakdown, and they were to come and remove us from the home and to take her. So what ended up happening was my mom wouldn't let them in, so they broke in. And all we could see is that the police just broke into the house. My mom is having this, it was just screaming and yelling and children running everywhere. I remember my sister and I hid under the bed, and the police dragged us from under the bed, yanked us up. Nobody got shoes or clothes, nothing. We were just yanked up in our pajamas, thrown in the back of a police car, So what is that? I must have done something wrong because I'm in the back of a police car with my brothers and sister, and the baby wasn't there. Gerard wasn't there, but the other two were with me. And I remember crying and snot running, and I cried so hard I threw up in the back of the car. Can you imagine what the police officer must have felt like when I threw up in the back of his car? And then the next thought, I can remember standing in the police station, still crying, there in my pajamas. Somebody's holding the baby, and we're standing there. We don't know what's going on. All I know is that we just got snatched up from the home, thrown in the back of a police car, and now we're standing in a police station. No one ever said anything to us about what was going on. So for me, what could have made that situation better? Some females, number one. Men are not very gentle when it comes to things like that. And then, something soft, something softer than a police officer standing there with a gun on his hip and handcuffs And when I say soft, I don't mean like a teddy bear. I mean just a softer situation, you know? It was very traumatic. It was, I would never want any of my kids to ever go through that situation, but something that would have been nice would have been a kind voice, you know, someone explaining to us that we hadn't done anything wrong and what had happened and why it happened. And the most important part of that being is we didn't do anything wrong. All we knew was that we were at a police station. So just a softer situation when you have a removal.
That was pretty much my question. What would have been different for explaining to the children what is going on, and you pretty much answered that.
Here we go. Am I on now? I have a book question for you because you mentioned that you escaped into books, and I love that. I teach children's literature at Liberty, and tomorrow's our last day of class, so I'm going to tell my students that, but I have some follow-up questions for you. One, if you could tell us what your favorite book was as a child, and then also, one thing you can think about it for a minute, or if you have several. We talk a lot in class about how children need to see themselves represented in books. Okay, so do you have any books that you remember as a child where you know? Okay.
Yeah,
you
there
do?
were.
Okay.
But I'm gonna have to tell you right now, I was a little bit advanced, so there were some things that I probably read and I shouldn't have. And that's the thing that happens when you don't have anybody watching what you do. My mom went to bed probably about 6 o'clock every day. Her medication and hers aren't. And so I pretty much could read what I want. When I started out in elementary school, I read every fairy tale that there was. I love fairy tales. I love them to this day. I love all fairy tale movies, but I especially love the books. And then I met this cute little redhead girl in about the 3rd grade, and we were both nerds, so we got along real well together. And she read Stephen King. So I started reading Stephen King at an early age. Don't let your children read Stephen King, it's not good. And then there was this book I read called The Planet of Junior Brown. And that was one of the first books that I read that had brown people in it, you know. And it was an inner city kid, and I really didn't feel like I was from inner city. I'm from Rocky Mount, North Carolina, you know. It's like, ain't no inner city there. But it was just really cool. I could almost see the people. I could almost feel the warmth of the sun on the sidewalk. I mean, it was just a wonderful story. And then there was a follow-up book to that. I couldn't remember what the name of it was, but The Planet of Junior Brown. Saw a movie about it a little bit later on. I was like, well, I didn't read the book like that. Don't let the children watch that movie. It's not a good movie. But now, like when my kids got older, it was really important for me to find books that reflected them. One of my favorite illustrators is Jerry Pinkney. He's an amazing illustrator, and little girls have curly hair, natural hair with plaits, and skin tones are perfect. Art is very important in books. And Patricia Polacco, she's a Jewish writer, I think, but her artwork, I don't know, it's something about people in New York, especially Jews in New York, have a lot of brown friends. So she had brown people in her books. It was always some amazing stuff in there. But Jerry Pinkney, if his name was on the book as an illustrator, I bought it, and my kids got it. You know, and there's just so many. But if you find a book with Jerry Pinkney as the illustrator, then you're good.
Thanks, that's really helpful. And also, Stephen King is really good at like capturing how scary childhood can be. But you probably were too young to be reading it. So.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You might be able to hear me. I'm a CASA volunteer working currently with a couple of 16-year-old boys. And what point in your lives do you think that you found the strength to take control of your lives? And what do you think gave you that strength?
I'm glad you answered the boy question.
Yeah, 16-year-old boys. That's we could be here all night on that. But I think one thing I realized as far as control is when I started. It's funny is when I started failing in college. When I started doing, I was taking exercise science, I really wasn't that interested in exercise science when I got there. They asked me what major, and so they ended up just putting me into something. And so I really didn't, I was making poor grades I wasn't used to making bad grades, but I was making bad grades in college. I'm away from home. I told you the whole story. But one of my friends ended up being, I would see one of my friends at Liberty. He would be dressed really smooth every day in a suit. I'd be like, man, where's this guy coming from dressed in a suit like that? And so I started asking him. He was like, you know, the business department, the business school at Liberty, they require that you wear a suit and tie to class every day. And I thought he looked pretty smooth. And so I switched my major to business management. And all of a sudden, my passion was in the business. I've always been fascinated with money and finance and things of that nature. So it's like a light bulb clicked on, and I started making very good grades. I started paying more attention. Things became, I felt like I could do anything I wanted to do. But there was a professor at Liberty who asked one particular question. He said, if money was not an issue, if you could do any job that you wanted to do, what would it be? And it sounds like a very basic question, but I really remember sitting back, and he didn't tell us to tell it. He told us to draw it, and I can't draw. I have no artistic ability. So I remember drawing, in my mind, a perfect job would be combining my passion for basketball and my passion for business. So that was creating a professional basketball team. That was the first time anybody had ever asked me that question. And so my mind just started clicking. It's like, I want to start a professional basketball team. I want it to be more than just an image that I drew. And so I really started to seek out the steps on what it would take to start a professional basketball team in Lynchburg. And I reached out to a league, and they put me in contact with the CEO, lets me know the steps, how much money it required, and that's another story. But I remember at that point realizing that no matter what I experienced in my background or where I was from, I had the power and control right then to make the steps necessary to make that dream come to fruition. So I think it was that point of me actually taking something out of my mind, taking a step out on faith and making it into reality is when I realized that that I do have some control over my destiny.
As he was speaking, and I was listening, I promise, I started thinking there had to have been some point where I realized I was in control, and unfortunately that was when I became a mom, you know, and I had to take care of my daughter, and I wanted to make sure that she never had to worry about any of the things that I had to worry about. And I had her when I was 17. And at that point, there was no more, like I might have stayed with my mom for another few months, but my mom had this issue with stealing from me. And I needed my money to take care of my daughter. So I ended up having to move out on my own. And I couldn't move out on my own. I ended up living with my sister in Wilmington. And I still wasn't in control because I was living with someone else. But after being with them for a few months and them using me like a slave at their house, I ended up moving out on my own, and I was 18 in a new city with a daughter as a single parent, making it work. So I was 18 when I struck out totally on my own, and I had to take care of my daughter, and she was the only reason why I survived, because there were so many times that I wanted to just sit down and not get up or pull the covers over my head or just give up on life altogether. But whenever I looked at her, I knew that I couldn't because she was relying on me to take care of her.
She's thinking. She said she had a question.
Yeah, don't do that. Just
Anything else?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Brown. I'm a member of the community, but I also work in mental health, and just would like to applaud you all for being so brave and telling your stories, because it's just amazing to sit here and listen to you all, so thank you. Also, you all both touched on the need for more or advanced mental health help for these parents that are struggling as well, and I think that's wonderful. And I know the system is broken as far as mental health goes, but there's some legislation out there, so hopefully we'll get going in the right direction. So I guess the question I have is I'm anxious to hear what relationships you have with your siblings now.
I would like to say that everything is all rainbows and unicorns, and we all spit out butterflies whenever we're together, but it's not like that. I think that my younger brother, the one that's 2 years younger than me, he has mental illness just like my mom. And that was one of the things that I worried about so much. I did not want to go crazy. And I studied everything I could to make sure that I knew what the triggers were. I don't take drugs for nothing. Like, I only take drugs if I'm about to bleed out my eyes or if I have a migraine with Vegas show lights, you know? Otherwise, I just wanted to make sure I didn't kick that chemical imbalance in. And he did everything that he possibly could do, not willingly, not knowingly. And it just sent him right over the edge, same age as my mom, so he's mentally ill as well. He ended up killing someone at a young age and went to prison for a very long time, was released from prison, and he's back in prison now because of some violent behavior. So that's my younger brother. And then my older brother, I think he has his own issues, but he's happily married right now, and he's got 2 beautiful children with him, and they are in Italy right now. He's in the military, doing very well. We don't see each other as much, and we didn't have very much of a connection because we weren't raised together. We didn't come back to each other until we were in high school. I never saw him again until we were in high school. He lived with us for a hot minute, and my mom was such a mess to deal with, he just couldn't stand it. So he went out on his own. So we are going to have a greater relationship when they come back to the States next year. I mean, we talk. I send their kids beautiful cookies in the mail, and they send me pictures and stuff from wherever they're stationed. And I love them to death, but we don't have much communication right now. My older sister, she had talked to me in probably, 15, 16 years. She doesn't like me very much. I don't know what I've done to tick her off, but she has issues as well. Not as bad as my mom and my brother, but she's got issues. And she just doesn't like me, which in the beginning it offended me because everybody wants a sister you can go do stuff with. Fortunately for me, I have those sisters. They're just not related to me. And then I think I had a younger brother that I didn't mention. He was 2 years younger than my other brother. And he was in foster care when we all were, but he got adopted into another family. And he was a baby when he was adopted. My mom was in mental hospital. We were all in foster care. He grew up, this is the strange thing, he grew up in this wonderful neighborhood in Alexandria, and he found us when he was 17. Come to find out, him and my younger brother were like twins. Like they had been raised together. They were both hooligans that just wanted to do whatever they could to get in trouble. I couldn't believe how much alike they were. They even looked alike. And I thought, we were in foster care, and he was in this wonderful adopted home, given the best of everything, and he still turned out like the other brother. And he ended up stealing a car, crashing it, and killing himself. So that's how my siblings and I relate to each other.
As far as my sibling goes, I touched a little bit on my next oldest brother. It's crazy how our relationship grew as I went off to Virginia. He was incarcerated, but I didn't have a lot of family support here. So things like, if you could have seen the jacket or the coat that I thought I was going to make it through my first winter when I came to Liberty, you would laugh. So my brother was writing me letters from prison, and I was writing him back, and I was telling him, like, his name was Sean. I was like, man, you won't believe how cold it gets here. It's snowing and blah, blah, blah. Somehow, some way, he figured out a way to organize to get some funds sent to me. I still don't ask questions to this day, but I needed a jacket, and my brother was actually sending me money and sending me different times throughout the semester. A little bit of money that I got came from my brother that was locked up. So our bond is unreal as far as how connected we are. We've always maintained that very close-knit relationship. So he's smarter than me. He was always more athletic than I was, and he taught me so many things. So he and I will always be close. I did have a sister as well involved in that process. Her and I are definitely close. She had a harder time dealing with the death of my mother because she was a little bit older, so we lost a little bit of contact during that time. But I do have some siblings from my mother's side because she was incarcerated when I was so young that I've never met. I'm the only sibling that my mother and father had together. My dad had several children, my mother had several children. But as far as on my mother's side, my mother was that connector, and there is one of my brothers, Jermaine. I've never seen him outside of prison, and with my older sister, I've never met. So there's still some connections there. But as far as my next oldest brother and my sister, we're very close, very close.
That'll be the end of our time, but again, so our pastries that we had out front here were from Mrs. Joy's. So if you enjoyed one, then you know where to get some more. You know your supplier. But also, I just wanted to say to each of you, so it's a gift for each. CASA has the starfish ornaments and necklaces. Some of you may have seen some of them, but kind of the story behind it is, if you've heard the story of the starfish, so a man is walking out on the beach and there are all these starfish with the low tide out on the sand, and he's going along, picking them up, throwing them back, and somebody stops him and says, "Why are you doing that? I mean, with the next tide, there's going to be 100 more, I can't save them all." And he says, "Yeah, but it made a difference to that one." And I think listening to you guys talk, it kind of gives me chills because CASA advocates, teachers, mental health professionals, social workers, we do it for the one, the one that makes a difference, and what a difference one life can make. Look at the community that you guys are raising up, the children, the grandchildren, the heritage that you all are passing on, and then the impact that you're making as community members. So I'm just, getting goosebumps now. But thank you guys for educating us and giving a platform to share your story and support the voices that's what we want to do in the work that we do. So thank you guys for being here, and feel free to connect with me more after.
One last thing, can you tell us where you're located for those that don't know? For those that haven't partaken?
It's 1008 Commerce Street. 1008 Commerce Street. 1008 Commerce Street.